Liberal colleagues there weighing in on the resignation, the announcement from former Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, now serving as Transport Minister, that she would be vacating that position. The Prime Minister very shortly thereafter announcing her appointment to be a special envoy for the reconstruction of Ukraine for Canada. A lot of this is happening after a long 10 years, you could say, for what has become, or who has become, a very well-known politician in this country. And there's a lot to unpack about why this happened, why now, and what it means more largely for the government. No better people to do that than our front bench this evening. With me, former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. Dan Moulton is here. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Larissa Waller is the founder of Henley Strategy. She's a former head of communications for Ontario's Progressive Conservative Premier Doug Ford. Kathleen Monk is the former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk and Associates. And Laura Stone rounds us out. She's a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Hey.
Dan, I'm going to start with you on this one. I feel like the rumor mill had been going for months about some sort of international appointment for Chrystia Freeland. How much of this do you think is her, and how much of this do you think is the people around Carney and Carney himself?
Well, I think you're right, Betsy. This has been some time coming. It feels like just yesterday we were in your studio in Ottawa together the day Chrystia Freeland announced she was resigning in protest to Justin Trudeau's leadership. And I mean, look, it's been a long road since then. I think since her decision to put her hat in the ring for the Liberal leadership following Trudeau's resignation and the outcome of that leadership process, it's been clear that she was going to be thinking about a future outside of Canadian politics and outside of elected office in the Canadian Parliament. I think this is probably her first clear step in that direction. It's difficult to be thinking about the next role, the next chapter of her career, and seeking it out while you're in the federal cabinet. And so I think this is a step towards her determining what her next chapter is going to look like and what her future is going to hold. As you mentioned, this has been something that's been widely expected throughout the summer months. The timing, I think, is a bit odd. I think it would have made sense to have got this out of the way prior to Parliament resuming. The government was obviously out pretty fast today to announce the timeline of the budget, which I know we'll have some time to talk about today, and that I think helped to start to move the headlines past this. But I mean, certainly it is going to be a big topic of conversation, and attention I think will continue to be paid to both Chrystia Freeland's exit from the cabinet and the future of her career.
I know that Kathleen, the government in this case, and Freeland went to great lengths to project the image that, like, this is kumbaya, in stark contrast to round one, which Dan mentioned, of course, was a completely different story. Talk a little bit, if you could, about why that's something that they want to project and what you think of the reasoning that's being presented so far about why this is happening now.
Yeah, lots of happy photos, backslapping, and cheerful looks coming out of cabinet for both of them. And I think it's important, certainly for Carney's government, to have that there's not really a huge division. But let's be clear, Chrystia Freeland ran again in the last election. She wanted to be a part of this government and a part of cabinet. But following the construction of Carney's cabinet, she didn't get the kind of profile she had in previous government. So, you know, she wasn't a part of the important cabinet committees, things like the Priorities and Planning Committee. She had a much diminished role in transport. Transport is still a big file, but even the scope of her work there was, diminished to some extent. So I think it was her choice to leave. She wanted to leave because she likes being, having a powerful role. And let's be clear, she will be remembered as a very elite part of some very powerful cabinet ministers that Canadians have had in our history. People like C.D. Howe, people like Marc Lalonde, people like Don Mazikowski, or even Anne McClellan. You know, these are the super ministers, if you will, people that have held multiple portfolios, who have done big things, have been considered by prime ministers to be their fixer. She did an enormous amount of good for our country as minister. She was principled and delivered on critical files. And I think history will be kind to her, even though many times in her role in politics. People have not been kind to her. But I think, in fact, history will look back on her as really having a really consequential role in Canadian politics.
Yeah, I'm sure, like, I'll leave it to everyone to debate the merits of that, of the sort of the legacy. But I will say, to Kathleen's point, Larissa, if you were to write the book of Justin Trudeau's time in office, like, it's him and she's the next biggest protagonist. Like, I think Canadians, certainly when they view that government, identify her as one of the most front-facing people of the government. Now, that could be a good or bad thing in the future, but I do think it does inform sort of why there's so much focus on this decision today.
Exactly, and I don't think they want me to write that book, but but I'd be happy to do so.
No, thank you.
You know what? In a lot of cases, the Ottawa rumor mill would say that Chrystia Freeland, when it came to the finances, was in charge. Historically, PMO runs a tight ship in every government. But Chrystia Freeland is known to have been the driving force on a lot of policies that I probably disagree with Kathleen, weren't so great. And we saw that deficit balloon, which she famously resigned over her own deficit. I wear two hats here. I'm a partisan conservative, and I can talk to you all about the things that I think Chrystia Freeland did wrong as finance minister. I'm also a Ukrainian Canadian. That hat that Larissa wears is happy that Chrystia Freeland was in such an influential position, because I think, especially in the early days of the war, it really was Chrystia Freeland that brought the international community together and solidified, kind of helped other leaders understand the risk that Putin poses to the West generally. I'm kind of like, taking a little bit of a pause here, because if there's one person in the world that can't stand Chrystia Freeland, it's Donald Trump. And if we're looking at rebuilding Ukraine and ending this war, Donald Trump's going to play a role there. So I'm worried that it's going to be, poking him in the eye just a little bit.
She is. I mean, she's focused on reconstruction, so maybe that's like the post. That's
Once there's peace.
Yeah, exactly. So not the peace process, but I do take the point. I will say, Laura, that just as someone who's covered, I don't know, a zillion of these resignations, it was a breath of fresh air to read in the statement, I am not leaving to spend more time with my family. It was actually like a pretty candid statement overall. What's your impression of, I guess, why Chrystia Freeland might be leaving, but also I think, it's a bit of a relief to the Carney government to have another reason to turn the page on, politically speaking, what they want to, away from the record of the previous government.
Well, look, there seem to be two rules in Canadian politics. One is no one resigns more than Chrystia Freeland, and two, no one gets more jobs than Dominic LeBlanc, who picked up another one today. I mean, look, there's definitely not like the scorched earth vibes of the previous resignation letter, which was, it seemed, there was a highly personal falling out and mismanagement on the part of the Justin Trudeau Prime Minister's office versus what happened here. This obviously seemed like part of a negotiation between the two parties, and Prime Minister Carney wanted to ensure that Chrystia Freeland left happy, and it seems that she did. That the resignation letter has very positive undertones, and it's not like they were filling a position that had gone unfilled. They've created this for her, so they've obviously wanted to make her happy. I find it interesting that there's no kind of timeline on her stepping away from her duties as a member of Parliament, which to me suggests that the Carney government still needs the votes, right? I mean, they're in a precarious position as a minority government, and maybe there was some agreement there for her to stay on, while they get through some of the difficult votes, including the budget that's coming up and other key pieces of legislation. I think, it seems to me that they were both happy to move on here. I mean, Chrystia Freeland left the Trudeau cabinet. She ran for leader against Mark Carney, the person who was supposed to potentially replace Trudeau. She lost by a very wide margin, and then she kind of had to dust herself off and return. And that was probably a difficult reality for her to face. So she seems like she's done with that element of her public life. And for Prime Minister Carney, he had not elevated her to a position where she was as public facing as she had been in the Trudeau government. And so I think this chapter seems somewhat resolved for both sides here.